Hi there everybody, welcome back to Indycar. This is Gordon Ross here in Partick this morning, or rather this afternoon. I'm sorry it's getting late. First little broadcast I've done since Christmas, so I'd just like to wish you all the very best. Hope you had a good Christmas. You're looking forward to Hogmanay. Today's little broadcast was inspired by various items of news through the week in between Christmas and New Year. And the one really which catches my attention constantly every time it happens is when the BBC put up a little news story about a Russian ship. Now, a Russian ship is intercepted in inverted commas, by plucky British sailors on their ship. Now, it's the only one probably in the entire northern part of the North Atlantic, but it is nevertheless a British Navy ship. And it was out there shadowing, this is another expression they use in the Royal Navy, shadowing this Russian ship, which was in fact in international waters and nowhere near anything of importance whatsoever. And of course, Russian ships routinely use the North Atlantic to get in and out of their port and through the Atlantic into international waters to go wherever they legally wish to go, and they pose no threat whatsoever to the United Kingdom. However, the British government and the British media like to play this card every now and again, just to remind us that there are Russian ships and they do go past British waters now and again going somewhere else, and that this is in some way a big threat and that we should all be worried about it, and that the Russians are definitely a threat to British security, and that we have to have at least our ship out there saving us from imminent disaster from these pesky Russians who are doing nothing but lurking suspiciously out there in international waters and going to do some sort of damage apparently to subsea cables. That's the latest fantasy tale that I was hearing in the past week. According to various sources of British media, the Russians are lurking above subsea internet cables running from Europe to Britain and from Britain across to the United States in a way that suggests they might be planning to cut these cables and cut us off from our brethren over in the United States, or in some way interfere with the flow of data down these massive cables as they crisscross the Atlantic Ocean. Now, how the Russians are supposed to be doing this kind of thing, where I don't know whether they're sending down midget submarines or something like that with people with a big pair of bolt cutters, but I think if you had cables being cut for major sort of trunk communications between Europe and America, you would probably know about it. And I certainly can't think of any possible way in which the Russians can hack into a fibre optic cable. It's not actually physically possible to do that even on dry land. So the fiction and the narrative of the Russians being a threat is still very much in the British media's armoury of things to scare us with. The second threat, of course, is not so much just from the Russians at sea in their ships, but lately there's been an awful lot of pandemonium and panic about Russian hackers in some way influencing the votes in both Brexit and the Trump elections. Now, the allegations go something like this, that Russian hackers are somehow going online and they're making multiple tweets or multiple Facebook posts over thousands of different fake accounts, all saying vote for Trump or vote for Brexit, because the Russians desperately want America in chaos with Trump, and they want the United Kingdom to Brexit out of Europe, to both weaken Europe and to weaken Britain. Now, I guess that the Russians would probably not be unhappy if those two things happened, but the fact that the British media is carping on about this, and the fact that there are supposedly all these hackers online doing all of these bad things to demonise the Russians, is obviously the easy way of dealing with a problem which is actually global anyway. But the problem is not just with the Russians. There are thousands of British trolls who come onto my feeds every day, and they make a nuisance of themselves, making abusive comments, trying to basically waste everybody's time by having arguments with people on the threads. So it's not just the Russians who try to influence people online. In fact, the British Secret Services and GCHQ, even the Army has its own brigade known as Brigade 77, which has thousands of people sitting at terminals all day long trying to disrupt and annoy the communications of people who are not in favour of the United Kingdom staying together. So the media campaign on social media is not being fought just by the Russians against Britain, but by Britain against British people as well, including you and I, as still citizens of the United Kingdom who happen to democratically want Scotland to become independent. Now, we wanted to do this in a peaceful way, and not because we want to wreck the United Kingdom, but because we want to save the Scottish economy from the disaster of Brexit, which, according to the British media, is all the fault of the Russians, which of course it isn't. It's all the fault of David Cameron and the Tory party, who want to take us out of the European Union so that they can protect tax havens and a massive number of banking and financial institutions which currently give money to the Tory party, and there are hundreds and hundreds of those. So it's a big battlefield, social media, at the moment, and the British media is also very good at blaming Europe for its woes. In fact, whatever the British establishment is guilty of doing, they will transfer the blame of that onto their opponent. So they will claim that their opponent is doing the very thing that they're doing. So the British government is claiming at the moment that the European Union is forcing them almost into a hard Brexit. It's giving them a bad deal, and it's Europe's fault. They're being punished for leaving. In actual fact, the European Union is just simply applying the rules that it would apply to any country that decided to leave the European Union. Now think about it from the European side. They cannot let anybody leave the European Union with a better deal for not being a member than they would get if they were a member. It just would be idiotic. So for the British government to say that the European Union is punishing us in some way for daring to leave the EU is just a complete fantasy. And in fact, we are damaging ourselves by voting to leave the EU. It was all our own fault. Basically, the British government has shot itself in the foot and then sort of thrown the gun over to Europe and said they fired it. It was a big boy who done it and ran away. Of course, the whole thing has been masterminded by the right wing of the Tory party to drag Britain out of Europe back into the Victorian era, where they can force wages down and raise the living standards of the already super wealthy, who are going to be above all the chaos that they're going to cause. Now, amid all of this going on, and social media being blamed for everything. Remember, social media is now being blamed for just about anything that goes wrong with anybody's political party or anybody's political policy. The Tories are blaming social media for corrupting our children's minds, for pornography, and yet one or maybe more of their own ministers has been caught with pornography like that on his own work computer, and then tried to blame the police officers who ratted him out. So you see where this is going. There's complete double standards. The Tories are not wanting children's minds corrupted, but they're quite happily to have their own minds corrupted on a daily basis at work, when they should really be working at their computers. They're sitting in front of pornography. Okay, so what about Brexit? Well, Brexit and independence are being presented in social media and in the media generally in different ways. If you think about it, Brexit is being presented, particularly by the BBC, as a good thing. It's going to bring back powers to the United Kingdom. It's going to make Britain great again, even though it never was actually great, and the word great just meant it was the big island of Britain. So it's going to make us great again, Great Britain, and we're going to get our sovereignty back. Now, the weird thing is that we never ever lost our sovereignty. Britain has always had sovereignty over itself. 95% of British laws came from the United Kingdom, and only 5% of the law-making and policy-making came from the European Union, and only that after Britain had agreed with 27 other states on the 5%. So really, this return of sovereignty is another big red herring. Returning the powers that it had is another theme. Getting your power back to make your own decisions. Well, what we've done is we've got our power back to make our own trade deals. The trouble is that as soon as we leave the EU, we have got hundreds of trade deals to negotiate. And bear in mind that the Canadian government took something like 15 years to work up a trade agreement with the EU. So we're not talking about a short-term thing that's going to take a few months to negotiate. It's going to take years for Britain to get enough trade agreements to actually start trading with other countries in any kind of meaningful way. And yet, they're being given 21 months by the European Union to actually start negotiating with other countries and get some kind of at least temporary trading agreements in place. So Brexit, despite it being portrayed as a good thing, is always going to be a humongous problem. And in the middle of all the chaos of Brexit are the poor exporters, the poor people who work in industries who are trying desperately to sell their goods abroad. Now, some Brexiteers say, well, it's great because the price of British goods has suddenly plummeted on the international markets. Our factories have never been busier. And that's true, but they're being busy making less money. It's called being a busy fool. Your prices are very low, therefore your profit margins are tiny. You get lots of orders in, but in order to make enough money, or even the same amount of money, you have to bring in more workers to do more work for less money. So what happens is the wages of the workers drop. More part-time workers are brought in, and actually the ironic thing is that you need to bring in low-paid, low-skilled immigrants to do the work, which is of course counter to what the Brexit argument was originally about, which is keeping immigrants out. So the whole thing starts to laugh at itself, and it's become a gigantic joke. In fact, just about everybody in the European continent has no idea why the UK has decided to vote to shoot itself in the foot. If you look at graphs of the way people voted in the United Kingdom for and against Brexit, you'll see that only Scotland and Northern Ireland actually voted against it. England and Wales, which is roughly 58 million people, something like that, they actually voted for Brexit, but only by a 2% margin. So a good 48% of the British population in England and Wales are actually against Brexit. Whereas 62% of the Scottish population was against Brexit. I can't remember what the figure is for Northern Ireland, but it was pretty high there too. But what about independence? How is it being portrayed in the media? Well, it's being portrayed in the media as a bad thing. And I even had a troll on my page recently who, when I was talking about the amount of taxation from fuel duty that Scotland was missing out on, and the amount of taxation on oil which is coming ashore and running through pipes into our refineries at 450,000 barrels a day, this idiot tried to point out that UK oil, as he called it, UK oil was of a particularly low quality, and it was so poor that they had to mix it with superior oil from abroad just to get petrol and diesel out of it. And this was his actual argument, was that somehow or other Brent crude, one of the finest oils, one of the finest fuels that you can buy, which commands a higher price, was somehow inferior because it was coming from the North Sea. And that somehow or other we had to get some superior oil from somewhere else to blend it with, as though it was making up for the low quality of our oil. So, I mean, there you have it. The argument against independence is that North Sea oil is low quality oil. I mean, that's as bad. That's the worst argument I've heard so far, and the most specious and ridiculous load of baloney I've ever heard from any troll on my thread. But there it goes. We have got poor quality oil. It's just such a burden on us that we're just lucky that England's there with its broad shoulders to take the horrible stuff off us and dispose of it. Thanks very much. However, independence, as we all know, sorry, talking to you as though you were a person there. As we all know, independence for Scotland is an option, right? And it's an option which allows us to decide what we do with our own oil, how we tax it, where the taxation goes, how much tax should be on petrol at the pumps, diesel at the pumps, and how much of that taxation should fall on the oil company's shoulders. So when you're independent, not only do you get all of your oil back, because your sovereignty takes in that massive 95% of North Sea oil fields, not only do you get that back, but you also get to decide how that massive amount of money is then spent, where these taxes come from and what we do with them. So we get all that back, and that's a good thing. I mean, it doesn't matter whether the oil's high quality or low quality. It's oil, isn't it? It's like you don't get high quality gold and low quality gold, do you? You just get gold. It's gold, it's gold. And then we've got the powers that we get back. Now, Scotland has always had its own laws, so we're not actually returning our laws. Our laws are already ours. Our education system is already ours. Our health service is already ours. So what powers do we actually get back? Well, we get back the powers to tax. And the powers to tax are the most important. The powers to tax companies which work in Scotland, operate in Scotland and make their profits in Scotland. And we can tax those companies if they operate in our jurisdiction, and I think that is the one thing that the Tory party has never ever done, is tax particularly the oil companies properly. If you lived in Norway, you would be taking a percentage on every barrel of oil that was pumped. Regardless of the price of oil, you would take a percentage of every barrel of whatever it was worth coming out of the sea, and that would be going straight into your central funds. And this is why everybody in Norway has a millionaire fund, and everybody in Norway has £1 million or more put away in the central fund that's specifically to look after them. And yet here we have nothing but deficit. The deficit is our share of British debts. 8.4% of the massive amount of debts run up by the British governments over the last 300 years. And for some reason we are being blamed for the debts that the Tory party, the Labour Party and whoever other parties have been in power. We get blamed for 8% of that debt. Now, I don't think that's right, and I don't think it's fair. If we are going to pay that debt, then we would expect to get our entire bit of the Bank of England, our part of the Royal Navy, our part of the Air Force, our part of the Army, our part of every other British asset that there is when we leave. So this is an argument that's been had many times before. When it comes to sovereignty, interestingly in Scotland we are not sovereign. The Queen is not our sovereign, all right? The Queen is actually a figurehead. She's Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland, not because she was chosen by the people of Scotland, but because she was allowed to have the Scottish crown, not the British crown. She is the Queen of Scotland, not Great Britain. She is the Queen of England and Wales and Northern Ireland, but she will actually always be Queen Elizabeth I of Scotland in law. But only because the sovereign people of Scotland have chosen to allow her to wear the crown of state of Scotland. Now, when we become independent, will that change? Well, that would be up to the people of Scotland, because we are sovereign, and it's written into our constitution, the constitution of the Declaration of Arbroath, that the people of Scotland are the ones who decide who wears the Scottish crown and who is the head of state. Now, in a modern context, that might mean we could abolish the monarchy, or we could keep the Queen as head of state nominally, so she would go on the stamps and the money if you wanted. We could choose a new king or queen. We could actually employ the king or the queen as we wished, or we could have no king or queen at all and just elect a president and become a republic. We would have all these choices, but at the moment we have no choice. We are strapped to the back of the Brexit at the moment. Whatever the Brexit becomes, we are tied to it. So I like to think of Brexit as a sinking ship which has been deliberately rammed onto the rocks and is now slowly sinking. And we have a choice of either getting into the lifeboat marked Independence and rowing for the shore, or going down with the ship with the rest of the people on it. Personally, I think it's time for us really to stop mucking about, stop talking about SNP, stop talking about Labour or Tory or anybody else, and just think about your own position, your own job, whether your company is going to survive, what Brexit is going to do to it, whether you are happy with the decisions that the Tories have made on your behalf, whether you're happy with keeping the Queen and the royal family, who are costing us even more money, and the Queen is now demanding, was it £350 million off us to do up her mansions when she has over £17 billion, I think, in personal wealth, and yet she's asking us to shell out for more. You and me, who don't have any money to spare, we get to re-wallpaper the Queen's palaces, and to put in new central heating and double glazing for her. It's lovely. She couldn't be happier, I'm sure. And then we have the two princes recently who've now seem to have been employed by both Walt Disney and the BBC. They've been producing radio shows on Radio 4. They've been appearing in lots of live interviews on the BBC. And we now know that they also feature in Star Wars as stormtroopers, which is kind of ironic, I suppose, isn't it? So there you have the royal princes being prepared to help with the whole Brexit thing. So when Brexitania becomes a place, it will have 2 new princes to really sort of bolster the British plucky citizens and get them working together again and get them supporting their monarchy. Frankly, I'm not fooled by any of that. I have nothing against either of the princes. In fact, I think actually Prince Harry's probably quite a decent young man and might even make quite a good king one day, but he'll never be allowed to do it. However, I'm digressing a little bit. The message today was really just about how social media is being used and how I predict it will be used over the next few months. We know now that independence is now almost at 50% support for yes. Now what that means is we're now at the stage we were at 4 days before the referendum in 2014, when suddenly everything went belly up and the British nationalists went absolutely bonkers and started zooming up the M8 towards Glasgow and up towards Edinburgh as well. They came up en masse. All 3 parties, loaded with BBC cameras, all stood in front of us and told us that there was no way we could use money after we were independent. They weren't going to let us use the pound. And remember all that storm of things that we weren't going to be allowed to do, and all the threats that they weren't going to buy ships off us, they weren't going to buy our electricity off us, they weren't going to buy our oil off us. All of these threats that were made and all of these vows that were made, if you just voted no, well, they've used all that ammunition now. So the next threat they're going to use against us will be something completely different. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but I imagine probably shutting down social media will be one of the things they're going to consider. So I would just beware, because I think restricting social media is the only real remaining weapon they have left to undermine our campaigning. Either that, or they start to put troops on the streets like they did in Spain to stop us holding town hall meetings and that sort of thing. But as you know, that kind of stuff, that kind of action goes down very badly with not only the public but also with the press, and the international press will be watching carefully this time. We've also now, I hope, got some ideas about how the new referendum will actually work, and I'm pretty certain of one thing: it's not going to be conducted the way it was last time. There will not be postal votes disappearing off. Ruth Davidson will not be allowed to meddle with them. A Tory party grandee who runs an election company will not be permitted to handle them or to verify them or anything else to them. In fact, I think postal votes will probably just be banned from this next referendum. And I'm hoping that we will have some kind of system, an electronic voting system, which allows us to vote over several days and probably allows us to vote online in some way, in a secure way, using some kind of secure system with fixed identification, which only we know, and which will guarantee that our vote is not only counted, but we can see it on the system and we get a receipt for it and we get a unique identifying code number which only we know. That way we can check our vote at the count that it's actually in there and that it's been counted and it's been counted correctly. And I think at the moment that there are government departments in Scotland working on that just now, trying to come up with a system which will be fair and not hackable and not manipulated by either the British Electoral Commission or any party members. So things are going to be tightened up, I can feel it. The SNP have gone quiet, which is usually an indication that they're working hard behind the scenes, and they will make their own announcements when they're ready to do so. But think of the SNP as just enabling you to have this referendum, giving you the choice that you want between Brexitania and independent Scotland. Now, I say independent Scotland, I'm not tying independence to Europe in any way. After independence, we as a nation can decide what we want to do about trading with Europe. I'm not saying that we need to go back into Europe or we need to come out of Europe. That can be left for the time being. Let's get the independence first, and then we'll settle the business of how we relate to Europe as a country ourselves, as a Scottish nation, not as an outnumbered minority in a British state, which we don't have any say in. Anyway, I am off in a moment to go and do some more driving lessons, but I wish you all the very best for 2018. It certainly cannot be any worse than 2017 was. In fact, I'm anticipating some big exciting moves for Scotland in 2018. It's going to be a difficult fight. I'm going to be here for as long as social media is here until we get our independence, and I'm not going to stop until we have won it. So if anybody wishes to help out on IndyCar, I'm looking for 1 or 2 people to help me monitor the site and to clear off the massive number of trolls who seem to have glued themselves onto my threads recently. But I take that as a good sign. If IndyCar was ineffective, they wouldn't be bothering trying to sabotage it. And if this is them starting to sabotage it now, then I anticipate that there will be other attempts later on using other techniques. I mean, I've been spammed before, I've had my account hacked, I've had people trying to force pornography into my sites, and I don't doubt that they will try it again. They will do all kinds of things to discredit people who are saying the truth. The truth is that Brexit is going to be extremely damaging to all of the British economy, particularly bad for Scotland with its heavy reliance on exports. It has a mix, but remember, our exports are what's generating our surpluses. The balance of payments of any country is what gives it its growth and what gives it its wealth. And if we don't have those, then we don't have the wealth to share out amongst the people when we are free, and when we're free to spread that wealth out a bit better after independence. Anyway, I'm off now, and I hope you all have a great Hogmanay. I wish you all the very best for New Year, and if I'm sober enough on New Year's Day, I might do another broadcast then. Okay, it's nice to talk to you all again, and have a good New Year. Bye for now.